So these are the steps you should take while planning a pen test. We'll see them here in detail. The first step of planning a pen test is to identify the needs of the customer. Here I use the word customer as the owner of the IT system that you perform a pen test for. Of course, the customer's basic need is to identify weaknesses in the information system and take measures before a real attack occurs. But here we should find the methods and targets according to the customer's sensitive topics. For example, who is the most important threat for the customer? An insider, an employee of that company, or an outsider? What is the most important asset that the customer wants to protect? A customer database, financial records, etc., etc. From physical security to web applications. There are a lot of different topics and infrastructures that may be subject to the pen test. There are a few factors to decide the scope of the pen test. The first factor, of course, is asset groups of the customer. And by that I mean you cannot test the wireless systems if the customer doesn't have a wireless network, right? But generally speaking, of course, the customer will decide the scope, but please remember, in most cases, you should guide them to decide the correct scope. You should prepare everything you'll need in the pen test. In addition, you should inform the company to be prepared for the pen test as well. On the pen tester side, you'll need the attacker systems such as laptop, external disks, USB sticks, etc., and you should be sure that all the necessary applications are installed on these systems. As another important part of preparation, do not forget to install and update the software tools that you'll be using. Just double check. On the other hand, advise the owner of the IT system to have the following setups before the pen test. Monitoring solution. To detect the attacks is as important as to prevent them. In addition, monitoring will let them know what you do throughout the pen test. Since all the pen tests have some risks, it would be better that the owner of the IT system have an up-to-date backup so that they can prevent any possible data loss. And lastly, you should be ready for a service interruption during the pen test, so help the system owner to prepare an emergency response plan. Now, of course, we cannot perform everything we want during the test. Since we are under the rules of an agreement, we do have some restrictions. But please don't forget that the actions we perform in a pen test are totally illegal unless we have an agreement with the legal system owner, right? So these restrictions are mostly defined in the rules of engagement and, of course, in the non-disclosure agreement. A non-disclosure agreement, NDA, is a legal contract between the pen tester and the system owner that outlines confidential information that the parties wish to restrict access to or by third parties. You will probably access the most critical and confidential data of the system owner, so this agreement is very important, especially for the system owner. Rules of engagement will decide the limits of the pen test. It basically decides the scope, total test duration, the times that the attacks will be performed, and the methods to be used. For example, you should identify whether the DDoS, the denial of service attacks, will be performed as part of a pen test. If it will be performed, the owner is probably going to ask you to perform the attack probably at midnight of a particular weekend.